Our interview this morning is with Glenn Lee Heaton. Glenn was born in Hobo Bend, Alabama in May of 1933. He served in the United States Air Force from October of 53 until November of 73, active duty. His highest rank attained was Lieutenant Colonel, 05. This interview was conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, January the 4th, 2013. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Mr. Heaton in any way. Also in the room we have Milton Gibson and Gary Burton, who are videographers. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and also for Operation Remember, City of Burleson, Texas. And with that short intro, Glenn, you can tell us about your time in the Air Force.
Well, thank you very much. Quite a nice introduction. I appreciate that. I started out my Air Force career. I'll give you a little overview of it, and then we'll give you some of the intricate details. But I was going to school in early 50s, and my dad got dabbling into politics. Got a probate judge mad at him, and I had to enlist, even though I was in the university and in the ROTC program, which meant if I graduated, I'd get a commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. I had to enlist to keep from going to the Army. So I did that, and then after I enlisted, I was fortunate to serve in my service. I served as a navigator for 3.5 years. Then I went to pilot training and upgraded, as it was a pilot, and then during that time, the rest of my service, I served in all three SAC Air Forces, 2nd Air Force, 8th Air Force, and 15th Air Force in different positions, from a pilot to instructor pilot to chief of standardization, and then ultimately the last 4 years I was in the service, I was on 8th Air Force staff working for the Command in General 8th Air Force in Southeast Asia. But after I got out of basic training and applied and went to cadets, I got my commission as a second lieutenant and wings as a navigator. I was first stationed in Savannah, Georgia, 2nd Bomb Wing, 2nd Air Refueling Squadron. My wing commander was future Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Davy Jones, and my squadron commander was an All-American West Point graduate, a guy named Rafalco, who later on was a general officer. And we had quite a few escapades. With all that high power there, we did missions. Our squadron was destined to do a lot of temporary duty. We had, I don't know the code names, but we would go, for example, 179-day TDY from Savannah to North Africa, and we supported B-47s coming out of Savannah and our 305th Bomb Wing down in Tampa, Florida. They would come over, we'd refuel them just north of Lodges, and they would go in and they would do their Super Snoopy stuff ring around Russia. And we would refuel them coming back out in the mouth of the Mediterranean, and they'd come back to the United States, and we would recover into Cities-Lemaine. And interesting facet on that, we were on alert and flying out of Cities-Lemaine, and we had one end of the airdrome, and on the other end was a squadron of Russian MiGs, whose job was to keep us, if we went to war, they were to keep us from flying out.
Where was this, Glenn?
Cities-Lemaine, North Africa.
Okay.
It's about 100 miles northeast of Casablanca. We had several operating bases in North Africa at that time. For example, we used on an emergency basis the shores of Tripoli song with the Marines there. We had a little base in Tripoli. But then later on, Gaddafi got in there and stopped that. But we had quite an interesting thing. As a matter of fact, while we were down in Cities-Lemaine, my crew flew the survey party into Madrid, Spain, and they laid out what turned out to be Torrejon Air Force Base, was one of our use bases in Spain, just outside Madrid. And that area of the world later on, we were refueling B-52s on what was called Chrome Dome operation, whereby we called it Ring Around Russia, because we, for a lot of years, had B-52s circling Russia with a decent interval between them with nuclear bombs. And we had a B-52 pilot got a little tired, ran into the rear end of a tanker and crashed and salvoed, and we had a couple of nuclear weapons down just off the coast of Spain that created quite a bit of national controversy. But things like that that was a very isolated incident, because for the refueling and everything we did, it was overall good, safe operation, because well coordinated between the crews of the different airplanes. And so I, in 1958, was selected to go to pilot training, and I went down to just outside Orlando, and went through pilot training, and then went through basic in Laredo, Texas. And when I got my pilot's wings, my first assignment was into El Paso in a 95th Bomb Wing, and I was a co-pilot on the KC-135s. Now I must regress a little bit. At Savannah, I was a navigator on KC-97s, and the 97 was a stratocruiser. The Pan Am used to use it as a airliner, and then the Air Force adopted it with modifications. They put tanks inside. We had avgas fuel in the wings and aviation fuel for the jets in tanks that they mounted inside the body.
97 was propeller-driven?
Propeller-driven airplane, 4360s, 44360s, and the limited power, we were running about probably, the airplane weighed just under 100,000 pounds, and we could get about gross weight of about 210,000 pounds. And then we had a certain amount of fuel available for the receivers, but we couldn't use the avgas in our airplane, so we were limited in range as to what we could burn in our wings, so we had relatively close base support. Now, when we got into the 135s, that was a quantum leap, because all the gas we had, or all the fuel we had in the airplane, was used by either us or the receiver. We could burn our engine's fuel from any of the tanks we had in the airplane. And KC-135, when we first came out in 1958, late 58, B-52s and KC-135s got on the scene. And it's interesting that Mr. McNamara, wanting to save about $500,000 on each airplane, he had Boeing make the airplane with no power-assisted rudder. And early on, we had 5 crashes, and people lost 5 airplanes and several people, because the rudder on that airplane was big as a barn door, and if you lost an outboard engine, if you didn't sense it and get full rudder application on your rudder pedal with your foot before centrifugal force took to it, you couldn't get adequate rudder for directional control. But that was retrofitted, and when they got power rudder, that used to keep it real good. 95th Bomb Wings, we were very fortunate to have a good group of people coming into a new squadron there, 917th Air Refueling Squadron. And we jumped right into the mission. We were refueling B-52s and anything that had a receptacle on it, and even we had an adapter we put on the end of our boom called a drogue. It was like a little screened cone that we hung on the boom. And then even Navy airplanes with the probes could come in with this probe drive in, and we could refuel them. However, it was against SAC policy to refuel Navy or Marine airplanes for many, many years. it happened on occasion if emergency and we had a drogue and we heard a Marine fighter, for example, over Tennessee driving in a thunderstorm and no place to land, needing gas, and we just happened to be up there with a drogue on there, and he'd get a little fuel, go home. So things like that happened throughout our service. Most airplanes from '58 till even today don't go very far without tanker support. And the tankers are still KC-135s, which the first one was built in 1958, had a 25-year lifespan, and it's into about its 55th year. They tried a little bit when President Reagan, and I digress numerically here, but the KC-10 was tried to come out to disrupt Boeing's stranglehold on good airplanes, and President Reagan wanted McDonnell Douglas to succeed, and so he gave them an opportunity to build a tanker from the DC-10. Of course, the DC-10 never was a good airplane because they ran it out into production early before it was fully vetted, and they didn't want the Boeing 747 to get too much of a foothold on them. But anyway, the Air Force had to get some KC-10s because of the president's thing, but they didn't get too many. They just kept refining and revamping the KC-135s. It's been a good airplane. Started out initially with a J-47's engines on it, and they developed with water augmentation for takeoff. We could get about 12,400 pounds of thrust for takeoff, which would give us a 40, about 50,000 pounds of thrust. And the airplane weighed at 301,000 on max gross weight starting for takeoff. So flying out of El Paso, 4,000 foot pressure altitude, on a hot day, being number 5 in a line where the temperatures got up there massively, we gave the people in downtown El Paso a good show. Good show. But our mission there was flying and refueling and practicing for war, refueled our B-52s, and early '60 we started alert in Guam. Our B-52s were on alert in Guam, so every week we did a ferry mission taking crews to Guam and bringing crews back home. And then we would go up and fly missions over Williams or some training base for Tactical Air Command to give their fighter pilots air refueling checks and things like that, and standardization, to release them to some competency level and all. And one of the more notable things, in a couple of years, we had a mission with the B-52s at that time doing the chrome dome that the B-47s had done. And the mission out of El Paso for the B-52 on the chrome dome was we'd take off from El Paso and we'd go northeast, coast out north of Boston, and we'd hit a tanker. And I say we'd hit a tanker because I flew as augmented pilot on the B-52 crews because it was a 30, 34-hour mission depending on the winds. And the B-52 crews it was just too much. So General LeMay and follow-on SAC commanders made special dispensation for people out of the tanker force who had passed a proficiency check in flying that airplane to fly as augmented pilot. And so I got I was a co-pilot, but I was doing pretty good, and my standardization evaluation results were pretty good, and they had checked me out as a quote-unquote instructor co-pilot, so I could fly as an augmented pilot on the B-52.
But you were flying missions from El Paso, Texas.
Yes, sir.
Over the top,
We would
going to Russia.
our profile would be cross El Paso, coast out over Boston, hit a tanker up around Newfoundland. Tanker was coming out of Portsmouth, New York, or maybe out of Goose Bay, TDY squadron out of Goose Bay, or Loring in Maine. We'd hit a tanker over there and take on about 125,000 pounds of fuel, and then head north, coast out, going over to Greenland on the backside till we got a beep on some Russian early warning radars, and then we'd turn west. And then we'd fly and we'd coast in over the northern part of Alaska, and then head south, come down and hit another tanker over Eielson Air Force Base at Fairbanks, Alaska, and take another 125,000 pounds. And then we would go west out the Aleutian chain to the Bering area there till we got another beep on the Russian early warning radar. Then we'd turn around and go back to El Paso. Wow. And that mission ran, like I say, with good winds, 28 to 29 hours, with adverse winds, 30, 34 hours. And so doing that and flying my regular KC-135 schedule sorties with my crew, I accumulated some time quite rapidly, and the criteria for time was competency and logged hours to get upgraded. And at that time, the average upgrade time for a co-pilot from the right to the left seat was about 7 years. I got it in 3 and was given an opportunity, and so I upgraded and got my own crew in 1963. So from 63 on, I was the big boy in the crew. And of course, we just continued. It was easy to, my ambidexterity developed there. But the missions were long and tedious and varied. You always had something interesting going on. And just a little tidbit, I get you a thought provoker while I'm talking here. Who shot down the first B-52? Later on that, remind me. But we still had a varied mission. We were going TDY. We had our own alert force at El Paso. We had 2 or 3 crews on alert in a little desolate place up in Grand Forks, North Dakota. When they were first building the air base up there, they had nothing but POL facilities and an alert facility. And we were up there pulling alert. We had alert out of Castle Air Force Base in California, and then our regular flying and thing support. So we were quite busy in the early mid-60s, and then, of course, when it got hot in Southeast Asia, that just doubled up our load. Several times during this thing, most notably in 1963, our ballistics early warning radars out of Thule, Greenland, got distorted because of moon rays diffusing the signal, and they got a signal that Russia had launched all of their ground-to-ground missiles. And so they pushed the button, and the SAC and NORAD and all the backs. We go into war, we go into war. And so they alerted, and all of our alert crews responded, started launching, and we had, before they got the mission stopped, we had 5 airplanes in SAC take off from their alert configuration headed toward Russia. And it was hard to turn them around because in Strategic Air Command, General LeMay was a taskmaster, and over the years they had evolved into our SAC tactical doctrine, and the SAC tactical doctrine supported the mission of Strategic Air Command at that time, which was our war effort was planned to be a one-way mission. There was a one strike back at them in retaliation, and anywhere the B-52 landed, there was nobody going to be there to support him and reconfigure him. So he was going to go in and drop his weapons if he got to his target, egress, and try to get some recovery base, and then sit it out. But no deviations from SAC tactical doctrine. And as a by note, and I'm sorry to jump so much, but one thing thinks of another, that SAC tactical doctrine adherence with no deviations allowed is what caused us to lose several B-52s in our later actions in Southeast Asia, because the crews were so indoctrinated in flying SAC tactical doctrine, and tactical doctrine for SAC was not set up to do repeat operations all during 24 hours a day from different areas on one country as target. And it didn't take but about 3 waves of bombers to come through into Southeast Asia before the smart guys down there figured out which way they were going to come, what altitude they were, and then they had relatively good, in a lot of situations, relatively good avionics and electronic warfare aids, and so they put their little sounds up there, and they, for example, in the 11-day war in 72, December of 72, the first day we lost 4 B-52s on the latter waves to go through. And the second day, we lost a couple, and we lost, all in all, we lost 15 B-52s in an 11-day war against the North Vietnam from 18 December to 29 December 1972. And the majority of the losses were adherence to SAC tactical doctrine, and no one would give a deviation authorization. The crews were fighting, and we even had one brigadier general got fired for his insistence on requesting permission to deviate and do our own different tactics coming over there. And the SINCSAC, with very nice gentleman, very experienced gentleman, but he was not going, he was a World War II, he was a fighter man. He never did fly B-52s or 135. He didn't fly anything in SAC before he was SINCSAC, so he only knew SAC tactical doctrine. Nevertheless, crews were unhappy. We lost too many, but we developed our own operating procedure that stayed within SAC tactical doctrine, and that we required the crews to fly in a close V. If they stayed within a half a mile of each other in a 3-ship formation, the combined electronics warfare from the EWIs could blanket out, and the ground radar for the SAMs couldn't pick up a target. And after the third day, the only B-52s we lost were airplanes that would stray out beyond a mile of the 3-ship formation, and then when they get out there with like a sore thumb, and they would lose the race. But that jumped a little far ahead on my scenario. Sorry. Chrome Dome, like I say, I got a lot of hours there, and I got my crew early, and then it's rush. We were busy. In the mid-60s, the divorce rate in Strategic Air Command was about 68%, because we would have, if we were lucky to spend 6 days in our own bed, in our own house with our family. The rest of the time we were on alert or flying or TDY or
6 days a month?
A month. Thank you. 6 days a month. And so it was suffering. And then, of course, similar problems they've had since we started the desert storms and things like that. A little bit different in that the length of time was only a year, and we had it perennially. But things change. And 1st of January 1965, they moved our squadron, the 917th Air Refueling Squadron, and moved from El Paso to Abilene to Dyess Air Force Base. And regressing just one bit, the wing commander of the 95th in El Paso, when I got my crew, was Colonel G.W. Johnson. And Colonel Johnson was I call him a jug ace. He flew P-47s in the Second World War, and the recognized ace living of the Second World War was a fellow named Gabreski, an old flat-headed Pole. And I say that admiringly because I met him, and I had spent a lot of time with him later on, because he and General Johnson were together in the Second World War, and He told me personally, he said, I was very fortunate that Jerry got shot down because he was the best stick and rudder shooter we had. So after he was shot down and in prison camp, it made it all the better for me, which is just a little side. But we were transferred to Dias, and everything just kept on going, busy, busy, busy. And we're picking up in Southeast Asia, a lot of TDYs and developing over there, and still had the Chrome Dome operation for the B-52s circling Russia. And going into Southeast Asia, the Canker Force was ferrying fighter squadrons over from the base in the United States to, as they could develop and open up and get agreements, State Department get agreements for operation out of different places in Thailand and in South Vietnam and in the Philippines and Okinawa and things like that. We would carry ferry squadrons over. We'd take 3 KC-135s would take about 16 F-4s, for example, and take them to Southeast Asia. Now, we couldn't do it in one loop, one jump, but it was a limitation for the most part on the part of the fighter's butt, sitting in his seat all that long. So we would hit a squadron, say, of F-4s coming out of mid-America. We would pick them up over Palmdale, southern part of California, and then we would take them out and we'd land in Hickam. And we'd refuel and refigure, get crew rest, and 24 hours later we'd take off, or 12 hours or 15 hours, depending on how the tactical people were feeling. Then we'd take off and we'd fly on into Guam and reconfigure, and then take them on into, if they're going to Southeast Asia, drop them off about 100 miles off the coast of Vietnam. And then we'd recover back into either Clark or back into Guam as our operating base, and then back to the States. So we had task forces going on pretty heavy there for a while in the mid-60s. And as a matter of fact, during that time, it affected my later assignment, but SAC was set up for the bomber people. SAC was very prejudiced in the treatment of people, and I say that in a guarded, half-hilarious way. The B-52s got the cream, and the rest of us got the grounds. And we'd go into Guam, for example, and we'd get old Second World War hooches, and the B-52s would get the air-conditioned new quarters. And I used to gripe about the treatment we were getting, both at Guam and then up at Kadena, when we were over there, either on a task force or when we were over on TDY, and we'd operating out of Guam, Okinawa, Clark in the Philippines, CCK, an air base in mid-Taiwan, and then early on, they were building bases in Thailand. We flew for a short time out of Bangkok International Airport till they developed some runways, and later on out of Tak Lee, and then they opened up a big metropolitan airport similar to DFW Airport in southern Thailand called Utapao, and that was a ZAC based on the Gulf of Thailand. But so it was a busy time.
Let me back up a second.
Sure.
You were ferrying fighter squadrons to Southeast Asia.
Yes.
Squadrons coming out of Texas, Oklahoma.
Everywhere, Georgia. You had a fighter squad, Eglin.
So you and 3 KC-135s.
Yeah.
You take off from El Paso, and you're going to hook up with these guys over Southern California.
Yeah.
How much earlier did you have to leave? Certainly,
Well,
they were flying faster than you were.
Well, that's true. It depended on where they were coming from. If we were going to take some from, say, Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, we would pre-position. We'd take off early, and we would overfly Williams, say, 20 minutes before they were to take off, and we had a little head start getting out so they'd all be assembled together, and it could come on in. And by the time we got to Palmdale, coasting out, we were all formed up, and they were tucked under our wing, and they didn't have to worry about anything except sitting there. And
So then you refueled them, and you went on to Hawaii.
they went with us. They
Y'all
landed.
landed. Y'all landed.
Everybody
at Hickam.
landed.
Okay.
Everybody landed at Hickam because the fighter pilot's butt doesn't have any longevity. You know,
Now, when
They
you
get
left,
tired.
when you left Hickam,
left Hickam.
you had the same fighter group.
They took off. We took off, and
Right.
they give us about a 20-minute head start, so we could take off and depart and get leveled off on our profile going toward Guam, and then they would take off, and then they'd catch us. You know, they could catch us within the first hour before we got a beam 200 miles out of Hickam.
So they were catching you before you got to the midpoint of your
Oh yeah,
flight.
oh yeah, yeah. They'd take off, and then of course they didn't. They were very lonesome over the water. They needed a big mother nester so they hurried up after they took off out of a ocean base. They hurried up, and they kept talking to you all the time because it was like a soothing mother's voice to them.
So they would burn a lot more fuel because of their takeoff, and they were trying to catch you.
Not
after
a lot, but a little bit, yeah.
After you refueled them,
They
they
just
throttled back for the rest of the
Well,
ride.
they just flew. We flew with the KC-135. Our nominal speed was pretty close to the nominal speed for a fighter airplane
Oh, okay.
to cruise. You know, we flew at about 450 knots true airspeed, and that's a different indicated airspeed. But I don't want to get confusing on indicated airspeed. Things like that, but we flew true airspeed, average about 450 knots, and so they knew that, and you know a lot of things are common together. They knew we were flying at 450 knots, and they could say, well, he took off 20 minutes ahead of us, but most of the time we were in our climb, so we weren't going that far down the stream quickly.
How fast were you flying when you refueled these guys?
Maybe it's the same speed. Some of them, as they got a little heavier, we had to give them a little 10 knots or so. But it was a good compatible speed. And as they got heavier, we'd give them a little bit of extra speed, but it was a good nominal speed.
The reason I asked, Glenn, I guess I always thought that there was a slowdown there. I thought obviously you had to keep enough airspeed to stay airborne.
Yeah.
But I thought that y'all would have slowed down some.
The tanker would slow
Yeah.
down? No, that was an advantage with the KC-135 with the jets. Now with the KC-97s, when we were refueling B-47s, as the B-47 got a little heavier, we had to speed up for them. And then as he got heavier, we had to speed up even more. And when you get to the temperature limits on those old 43.6s, the only way to increase airspeed was we started about a 300 to 500 feet a minute rate of descent, as slow as we could to get the speed, and the B-47s to stay on the boom, because if we stayed level, he would fall off because he would get approaching a stall. So that's a good thought, but the nuances of air refueling have gone on ever since, they started dropping a hose from one old Stearman bi-wing to the other Stearman di-wing and pouring the fuel down with a funnel. But it was that was the great thing about the jets, about the KC-135s, is that it gave such, well, for the last 64 years, it's been proven, that the KC-135 was the best investment the U.S. Air Force ever made. And I might as well say, while I'm right here on this subject, the head man at the Boeing company gave President Reagan an offer for a follow-on tanker. The 135 was developed, as I said, for a 25-year shelf life. In 1980, the chief operating officer or the head man of Boeing gave President Reagan an airplane for a follow-on tanker called the KC-747. Now that would have been a panacea, and he gave it to him at $50 million a copy. Reagan, like I said earlier, he wanted a DC-10 in on the thing, so he refused a $50 million copy. So the people had to keep resurfacing the wings, and as they developed engines later on in life, actually after I got out of the service, they put CFM56 engines on the KC-135s as a part of the upgrade, and that gave you, instead of roughly 50,000 pounds for takeoff, which was pushing a 300,000 pound airplane, they put these CFMs on them, and the CFM had an adjustable thrust range, horsepower. 22,000 was the minimum, and they could build them up to about 28,000 pounds of thrust. And then they increased the gross weight with 22, that's 88,000 pounds of thrust, which is, almost 60%, 70% more than with us. They increased the gross weight for the 135 up to 325,000 pounds. I used to kid all of these people with their flying Cadillacs, that they never lived till they took off with a old KC-135 out of a 4,000 foot pressure altitude base, fully grossed, and temperatures ranging over 100 degrees, and 13,000 foot runway. You're in danger of hitting a 25 foot tower a mile and a half off the end of the runway, because you just run till you get to the end of the runway, and then you rotate because you don't want to run all over the gravel.
Let me ask you a little bit about tankers.
Sure.
135s, I guess specifically. The tanks are in the fuselage, Glenn?
Yes, we have.
And there are a series of tanks?
Yes.
They're all baffled?
Yes. We have to maintain the center of gravity on the thing. Right. We have the wing tanks. They have three tanks in the wing.
Did you refuel out of those wing tanks?
Well, you see, we could use any fuel on the airplane because it was all JP fuel. And so then we had body tanks.
Did you pump that fuel, or was it gravity, Glenn?
No, pumps. We had 2 pumps in each tank, not in the wing tanks, because the wing tanks we could, the outer tanks we could drain inboard coming into the fuselage. But we had 2 pumps in each tank except the wing tip tanks. And then in the body of the fuselage, we had 3 tanks, forward, center, and aft. And we had pumps in, and actually we had an auxiliary tank that they found a little space to put about 7,000 pounds up in the tail section. That was nothing but air there, so they put a tank in there and put more fuel. So you could drain that fuel into the aft body tank out of the tail, drain it down, and then out of the center wing tank, you could pump from it directly, or you could drain part of it forward to the forward tank to maintain center of gravity. And that's a really good point, because at times when we had a particular sensitive mission, and we're operating right on the border, like a couple of times in Southeast Asia, we landed at the base, and as the entry for the 135 had a ladder up in the close to the end of the nose section that we climbed up into the cockpit, or we climbed down. And several times we had to jump back on the ladder to hold the nose down to put a stand behind the tail, because our center of gravity was such. Now it was really harrowing to land because the tendency would be for it, when you land, you flare from a descending profile, 500 to 700 feet a minute rate of descent, and you flare to almost 50 to 100 feet rate of descent for landing. And we had to maintain about 4,000 pounds of fuel when we were that light in the forward tank to keep it from
Keep the nose down.
pulpit, to keep the nose down. But several times we got off the ladder and the nose started up and the crew chief on the ground started, get back, get back, get back, get back on. So,
All of those tanks had bladders in them, I guess, didn't they?
no,
They didn't?
no. No, now they put bladders in later, well, they put bladders mostly in the C-130s. But they weren't bladder tanks, they were,
They were just aluminum weld, whatever
Yeah.
the material would have been.
yeah.
Wow.
Fella,
Okay.
fella get along good if he was in the fuel section and he was a little short fellow. We used to get little short, skinny fellas to work in maintenance and fuel repair, fuel cell repair. Because, the inspection port is not that big. And
They have to go wear a respirator, I guess, when they went in there?
well, if they wanted to replace a fuel pump, some of them were inside the tank. But most of them you could get
Those
to.
tanks would have been, or those pumps would have been pretty high performance pumps too.
Oh,
wouldn't they?
listen, 6,000 pounds a minute.
6,000 pounds, so 1,000 gallons, not
Yeah.
quite 1,000, 800 gallons a minute, something
8
like
to
that.
1,000, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we could, we could put the fuel to them.
And when you were refueling, be it a B-52, a 47, F-4s,
F4,
F-8s, whatever,
Yeah.
you were still pumping at those kind of rates?
Yeah, if they could take it. We were limited only by the fuel system of the receiver. With an empty B-52, we could put 2 pumps on there and get him up a little up over 1,000 pounds a minute for a while. But then as the fuel pressure developed up, if we'd have kept both pumps on, it reached a point it pushed him off the boom, even with the pressure lock. So we decreased to 1 pump. But yeah, and the fighters, we never could use over 1 pump a tank with a
I don't
fighter.
normally ask questions during
That's
interview,
great.
Glenn, but I just,
That's wonderful.
a lot of these things
Sure.
we've never heard.
Uh-huh.
And it's just, sometime 40, 50 years from now, when somebody's looking at this DVD, they'll wonder about these things.
Yeah, well, that's,
Go
that's
ahead,
why
sir.
I'd like about 3 hours with you.
Yeah.
But anyway, now, so I got to recover my train of thought there. Where was I when you so rudely interrupted me?
We were
Missions. We were flying. I was out of Dias, and we did our normal thing. We did our TDYs to Southeast Asia, our alert TDYs to Fairbanks. We were flying. They had the Chrome Dome mission, and we would have to go and do our support TDY to Fairbanks to hit the B-52s on their Chrome Dome around Russia. All in an integrated support time. Very, very busy time. And then 1967, the load got so much that the 509th Bomb Wing in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Pease Air Force Base, had an insurrection there. People were on TDY so much, and they were young people, hadn't grown up in the early days, and they had a mass resignation. And so they had to call quickly a basic experience level to come in to get and build up. They had two squadrons up there in the 509. They had the 509th Area Fueling and the 34th Area Fueling Squadron. So I was selected to go up and be Chief of Standardization for the 34th Area Fueling Squadron, and we're building up, remanning the squadron because they had about almost a 60% desertion rate, we called it. They just, people wouldn't, most reserve officers had an option to get out anytime. But I was a reserve, but by the time my time to get out, I got upgraded to a pilot. And then the next time I had to make a choice, they'd said, well, hang with us, we'll make you an instructor pilot. So they upgraded me to an instructor pilot. I stayed with them. And the next one, well, hang on, we'll put you in standardization. So it was a sort of as a requirements to get out or stay, I got job promotion. Might not have been all skill, but a little bit of it helped. But nevertheless, I was Chief of Standardization, 34th Area Fueling Squadron. We were still the 34th had we had old B model B-52s. And came time for the 509th Bomb Wing to go en masse to Southeast Asia for 179 days. And we're going to lose our B-52s, and the 509th Bomb Wing was going to pick up the B-2, the Delta Wing swing wing airplane. So we were in Southeast Asia, and like I say, going through Guam and all like that. And I had a experience one time. I was coming back from Thailand, coming back to the States, and stopped over in Guam to crew rest and pick up a load of whatever they wanted to bring back to the States. And while I was there, the operations officer of the 44th Bomb Wing there at Anderson said, we need to pick up a EWO alert for a while until we can generate and get somebody from Okinawa or Thailand to come in. Could you get on EW, early warning alert, for 24 to 48 hours? Who am I to say no? So we went on alert as an alert airplane. And then the rule was, when you were on alert, you were a dedicated airplane, and after you went on alert and you checked in with the wing and the Air Force command post as being ready to respond to an EWO alert, the airplane was yours. Nobody fooled with it except the captain, the crew commander. They had air police guards on it to keep everybody away and everything like that. So we went on alert, called in and checked in with everybody, and then we shuttled down and went to crew quarters. And of course, being on alert, we got good quarters, because they wanted us well rested. And so about 12 hours later, we went out to do a pre-flight on the airplane, and we got out there, and there was activity going on around my airplane, and the guards were there, but I looked up in the cockpit, and there's two pilots sitting up there in my airplane, and I'm on alert. Well, right away, and I forget the code words right now, but it wasn't broken arrow. Broken arrow was a nuclear alert. But a degradation of security, I'll think of it in a little bit, but I called a breakdown, of infringement of security had been violated. And security around an alert airplane was a serious thing. Got everybody's attention just like that. So here come the air police wailing around, and here come the wing commander, here comes the DO. SAC had got into it and everybody. And the director of ops for the wing came down and he said, what's going on? By this time, I was a major at this time. He said, what's going on there, Major? And I said, well, we went on, as you know, because you asked me about staying, we picked up our EWO commitment yesterday, and I come out today, and somebody's in my airplane. And I said, I was in the first wing, the first squadron, when General LeMay started Operation Tryout in 1955, going into this alert business. We were the guinea pigs. 2nd Bomb Wing and 305th Bomb Wing were the guinea pigs to do all sort of configurations, testing response times. First week we were on alert, you couldn't even take off your shoes. You couldn't take a shower. You could brush your teeth, was about the only healthy things. And if you went to the bathroom for bodily function, you better go quickly, because they would push the button and check response times from different configurations. I said, I was in the first wing developing this alert, and if there's anything I know, it's the rules for an EWO alert airplane, because I've been on it ever since General LeMay started the inception of it. They're up there, it's a security violation. He said, well, now I can explain that. And I said, well, you can explain to somebody else, because we got this going. And the wing commander comes up and he said, what's wrong, Major? And I said, well, I've had a security violation. And 7 high. We've had a 7 high. That was the code words for a security violation. He said, well, now, why is this? And I told him, And the director of operations said, well, we got a B-52 coming back from a mission into Vietnam, and he's going to be a little under his projected fuel reserves, and I just needed an airplane to pull strip alert for him, because if he couldn't get his gear down and he had to abort the landing and go up and try to troubleshoot it and things like that, he might need somebody to jump up and give him some fuel. He might need fuel on emergency. So he thought, well, I got this airplane. He's loaded up with a new old load. What are the odds on it going to war? So I'll just put a strip alert crew in there. Well, that's good thinking for utilization of manpower, but that's not good thinking by the SAC tactical doctrine. And so SAC got into it, and as a reaction to that poor DO was relieved of his job and sent back for retraining to learn about how SAC was run. And the wing commander was asking me, why did you do that? And I said, well, I'll tell you, Colonel. I said, ever since I first came here to Guam in 1959, and everything I go through Guam, I've been treated second class because I was a tanker. And I said, I've griped to everybody here that when I come through, I've griped to everybody everywhere I was. Guam makes me sick. And I myself, as several times, have stretched the rules in not returning to Guam with a minor emergency when I should have, but I didn't, because I'd get sick when I throttled down to go into Guam, and I stayed sick till I leveled off leaving Guam. He said, well, why do you think that is? And I said, well, that's just the mentality of SAC. SAC was set up for the bombers, and tankers were just unnecessary. You don't go anywhere without us, but that's it. He said, well, would you like to do anything about it? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, the SINCSAC is starting a task force over here, a tanker task force to run all tanker operations. That's tanker mass efforts with tankers and TAC coordinated with receivers and all the tankers going through Southeast Asia. When they leave Hawaii, they belong over here, and they won't belong to the 8th Air Force Command Post. They'll belong to the Tanker Task Force. And I said, not yes, but hell yes. He said, all right, when you get back home, you tell your folk that you're going to be transferred to Guam as part of the new Tanker Task Force that SINCSAC is setting up. So that's one thing that came out of it. So I went, later on, we went on back to Pease, and we were working hard there doing training and everything. So I told them I was going to Guam, and later on we went to Guam and was part of the Tanker Task Force Command. Early on, as part of the Tanker Task Force Commander, the 8th Air Force Commander got into a little dalliance problem up in Taiwan. SINCSAC was looking for him, and the 8th Air Force Command Post called and said, do you know where the commander is? And I said, I don't keep the commander's position. You go where he is. He said, no. I said, well, why don't you check Okinawa? Anyway, they checked Okinawa. The wing commander up there wasn't going to get caught, so he just told him. He said, he landed in Okinawa, said he didn't want anything to do with us. He went over and got a commercial airplane to Taiwan. Well, when he got back from Taiwan, he was relieved. General G.W. Johnson, my colonel from Biggs, was director of operations for SAC then. He got his 3rd star and was sent over to Guam as Commander 8th Air Force. When he landed, I knew he was coming in. When he landed, I met the airplane and I saluted him, and that was, he hadn't seen me for 8 years. And I highballed him and welcome to the island. He said, well, they told me you were stirring things up over here, Heaton, but I thought I'd come over and sort of see if I could help you out. And he said, give me 2 or 3 days to get my wings. And he said, come up on the hill. 8th Air Force headquarters is up on the hill there. Come up there and see me. So ultimately I went up there, and he said, I want to pull you up here. He said, but I need somebody who got some sort of a grasp on things. So he said, I'm going to pull you up. I'm going to make you Chief of Current Operations for 8th Air Force. so you can get a handle on it. So I went up on the hill, took over as chief of current operations, and then after about a month, he said, I want you up here in my office. So he pulled me up as ADO of 8th Air Force, and that started my interesting time because I was talking all over. And nobody knew if I was talking with a lieutenant colonel insignia here or I had lieutenant general insignia here because I was ADC to the commanding general. So it was a very interesting time, and we had so much stuff to go. I could give you another 25 to 30 minutes on from 1970 to 73 in SAC, but most of it has been historical, recorded. I could give you some of the inside stuff that you're not aware of that they don't like to have publicly known because everybody has sores, and God knows the Air Force has many of them. If we could get rid of the politicians and several of the old corps, and they about got rid of the old corps now, and it's young people coming in who are more with it. But anyway, I came back, retired at Carswell Air Force Base because my boss gave me the option of going anywhere I wanted to. I came back. I couldn't get a job. They were looking for people in operations at the DFW. They were fixing to open it up in the next 6 or 8 months, but I interviewed out there, and the guy wasn't about to hire me because the guy that the politicians had hired to be the director of operations, he had been the general manager of a Joplin, Missouri little airport, and he wasn't going to hire anybody who had any more experience than he did. So when I retired from the Air Force, I was at Boeing interviewing for a job, which I later on got, and that started me out in my next 20 years, excitingly, for 5 years in Iran. But the Air Force had a good foundation laid for me, and I have been extraordinarily successful both in my Air Force career and later on because of that.
You bet. Thank you, sir.
Thank
you
you.
for your service.
Thank
you
you
for coming to see us, Glenn.
Oh, my
It's,
pleasure, my pleasure.
Am I ready? Oh, okay, before I go, you remember I asked about the B-52 shot down? Well, if you didn't get it right, shame on you, but if you got it right, it was an F-100 pilot flying out of Kirtland Air Force Base who was launched off of a simulated alert situation, and he would go up and we had a training exercise in conjunction with Tactical Air Command. Our B-52s from El Paso would go up and we'd fly a series up there and let the fighters practice their approaches for missile firing. They do head-ons, they do side chases, tail chases, and things like that. And they'd get separation. And this F-100 had been launched out of Kirtland. Our B-52 had after they flew their profile mission, was doing this up and down and east and west, west of Kirtland. And they'd done about 8 approaches with this F-100, and the captain of the B-52, crew commander, said, okay, one more, and we got to go home. Well, I don't know what kind of approach it was, but the F-100 maneuvered itself. He got up behind them, and then he said, tally-ho, wappo. And he said, oh, feces, oh, feces. You know what that is. And he said, missiles coming, missiles coming. And about that time, the missile flew up the tail cone of the number 2 pod on the B-52, took out engines 3 and 4. And of course, everybody in the B-52 who had an ejection seat ejected. There were 6 people on the airplane, 3 got out. So it was a New Mexico Air National Guard F-100 out of Kirtland, shot down the first B-52.